80 countries, 30 languages, one lie. In the summer of 1983, an anonymous letter appeared in a small newspaper in New Delhi. The letter claimed to be from a well-known American scientist. It said the AIDS virus had been manufactured by the Pentagon in a laboratory at Fort Detrick, Maryland, as a biological weapon that had escaped containment. The newspaper was called The Patriot, and according to KGB defector Ilya Dzurkvalov, it had been founded by Soviet intelligence in 1962 for one purpose: to publish stories the Kremlin needed the world to believe. The letter was fake. The scientist did not exist, but the story was designed to do something very specific: to plant a seed. For 2 years, the seed sat dormant. Almost no one noticed. The article was buried in page 17 of an Indian newspaper that most Western journalists had never heard of, but someone in Moscow was watching and waiting. On September 7, 1985, the KGB sent a classified telegram, document number 2955, to the Bulgarian State Security Service. The telegram laid out the objective in plain language: to create a favorable opinion abroad that AIDS was the result of secret experiments with a new type of biological weapon by the secret services of the USA and the Pentagon. This was no longer a planted article. This was a coordinated intelligence operation. 1 month later, on October 30, 1985, the Soviet newspaper Literaturnaya Gazeta published a long article by journalist Valentin Zaitvalov. It cited the original Patriot story from India, a planted KGB article citing a planted KGB article, and added new fabricated details about Fort Detrick and Pentagon experiments. The lie was now laundering itself. But Moscow needed something the operation still lacked: a credible scientific voice. Someone with real academic credentials who could give the theory a veneer of legitimacy. They found him in East Berlin. Jakob Segal was a retired biology professor at Humboldt University. He was born in St. Petersburg in 1911. He and his wife Lily were Jewish communists who had fled Germany in 1933, obtained Soviet citizenship, and returned to East Berlin after the war. Segal was 74 years old. He was ideologically committed, and he was willing. According to historian Thomas Boghart, Segal was likely encouraged to look into the matter, guided toward a predetermined conclusion without being told explicitly that intelligence services were involved. Segal, his wife Lily, and a retired colleague named Ronald Daimlo produced a 47-page pamphlet titled AIDS: Its Nature and Origin. It claimed that a scientist at Fort Detrick had combined two existing viruses, the Visna sheep virus and HTLV-1, to create HIV in 1978. Segal himself later admitted the theory relied on assumptions, extrapolations, and hearsay. He had no direct evidence. It did not matter. In September 1986, the Stasi's Foreign Intelligence Division, the HVA, distributed the Segal pamphlet at the 8th Conference of Non-Aligned Nations in Harare, Zimbabwe. Over 100 countries were represented. The pamphlet was packaged inside a brochure titled AIDS, USA Homemade Evil, Not Out of Africa. The title was calculated. It offered African and developing nations an alternative to the prevailing scientific narrative that HIV had originated on their continent. It gave them someone else to blame. The Stasi registered the campaign under the codename Operation Denver on July 17, 1986. It was run by Department X of the HVA, the division responsible for active measures and disinformation. The lie now had institutional backing, academic credentials, a scientific-looking report, and an audience of over 100 developing nations primed to distrust the United States. And it spread. On October 26, 1986, the British Sunday Express made the Segal claims its front-page story, the first major Western newspaper to do so. A KGB assessment later noted that the Sunday Express coverage gave the story additional believability and credibility in the West. By 1987, the story had appeared in over 80 countries and in more than 30 languages. Soviet media alone ran the claim 40 times that year. It appeared in newspapers across Africa, Asia, Latin America, and Europe. In countries as far apart as Bolivia and Pakistan, Nigeria and New Zealand, Grenada and Malta. On March 30th, 1987, CBS News anchor Dan Rather reported Soviet claims that AIDS had been developed in a U.S. military laboratory. He did not include a rebuttal from the United States government. From the KGB's perspective, this was the high point. American television was now repeating their lie back to the American public. But the United States was fighting back. The State Department's Active Measures Working Group, a unit created specifically to counter Soviet disinformation, published a detailed report in August 1987 exposing the campaign. It traced the lie from the Patriot article to Literaturnaya Gazeta to the Segal pamphlet to the global press. On October 23, 1987, Secretary of State George Shultz sat across from Mikhail Gorbachev in Moscow. Shultz confronted him directly. He told Gorbachev the Soviet Union had been peddling, in his words, bum dope about AIDS and Fort Detrick. Gorbachev waved a copy of the State Department report and complained that publishing it undermined relations between their countries. 1 week later, October 30th, 1987, the Soviet newspaper Izvestia published an article by two Soviet scientists denying that AIDS was man-made. It was the de facto end of Operation Denver. The Kremlin had been cornered, and they quietly backed away. The campaign was over, but the lie was not. It had been planted in too many places, repeated too many times, translated into too many languages. The retractions came in English. The lie had traveled in 30. In 1992, Yevgeny Primakov, the newly appointed director of Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, admitted publicly that the KGB had been behind the AIDS disinformation campaign. The confession confirmed what the United States had been saying for years. But by then, the damage was done. A 2005 study by the RAND Corporation and Oregon State University surveyed 500 African Americans between the ages of 15 and 44. Nearly half believed HIV was man-made. Over 25% believed it had been produced in a government laboratory. 12% believed the CIA had created and spread it. 15% believed AIDS was a form of genocide against Black people. The researchers traced these beliefs not only to the KGB campaign, but to a deeper history, to the Tuskegee syphilis study, to decades of documented medical racism in America. The Soviet lie had worked because it landed on ground that had already been poisoned by real injustice. And those beliefs had consequences. The study found that people who held conspiracy beliefs about AIDS were significantly less likely to use condoms or seek treatment. Scholar Joshua Yaffa later argued that delayed antiretroviral therapy in South Africa, driven in part by distrust of Western science, may have cost as many as 330,000 lives. One planted letter, one fake newspaper, one retired professor, one lie designed in Moscow, laundered through New Delhi, amplified in East Berlin, distributed in Harare, repeated in London, broadcast in New York, and still believed today. Operation Denver, the lie they told, the one that never fully died.